Are we facing the exact moment in which Ferrari understood that the SF26 fits better with Hamilton than with Leclerc? The first day of testing in Bahrain was much more than a mileage day for Ferrari. It was the first real, raw, and unfiltered contact between its two pilots and the SF26 under comparable conditions. From the start of the morning session, the team's focus was on understanding the correlation between the wind tunnel, the simulator, and the track. They weren't looking for headlines, they were looking for patterns. And it was precisely a pattern that ignited all the internal conversations. When the runs of Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc began to be superimposed under similar fuel and tire conditions, the engineers detected a difference of around half a second in key sectors. It was not an isolated attempt nor a lap with ideal conditions. It was a repeated trend in simulations and specific runs that directly surprised Leclerc, as described in the file. That half a second wasn't a headline number, it was a structural gap in how everyone was interacting with the car. The key was in the most delicate phase of the Bahrain layout, the transition between hard braking and rotation in a medium-slow corner. The SF26 showed entry stability that allowed Hamilton to maintain progressive pressure on the brake pedal while he began to laterally load the car without causing a decompensation of the rear axle. Leclerc, due to his more aggressive style of attacking the apex with a faster release of the brake and a more violent rotation, found small oscillations that forced him to correct with micro-adjustments of the steering wheel. These micro-corrections, invisible to the viewer, were visible in the telemetry as small energy and temperature losses in the rear tire. The most revealing data was not the absolute time, but the construction of the lap. Hamilton didn't seem to be pushing the car, was fitting within its optimal window. The SF26 on this first day showed a relatively narrow operating window. When downforce, height, and balance were within that ideal range, the car was extremely efficient. When it went slightly out of that range, it became more nervous on the rear axle. Lewis, with a more progressive management of weight transfer, managed to keep the car in that range for longer per lap. Another critical point was hybrid management. In Bahrain, efficiency in exiting slow corners and the management of electrical deployment make clear differences. Internal data showed that Hamilton opened the throttle slightly earlier when exiting corners like turn 10, but did so without causing a slip peak that would punish the battery or tires. That efficiency translated into greater sustained speed on the backstretch. It was not a spectacular difference in a single point, but a constant sum of tenths distributed throughout the turn. Leclerc, accustomed to a more reactive front-end car, needed a sharper balance to feel comfortable attacking. The SF26, in this initial configuration, seemed to reward stability more than aggressiveness. And here comes the real surprise. The car was not responding as the Monegasque expected. Not because it was slow, but because it didn't amplify his natural style. Instead, it enhanced the way Hamilton manages lateral, longitudinal, and electrical energy. Ferrari, aware of the sensitivity of the 2026 project, did not dramatize the data publicly. Internally, however, it was understood that development should revolve around expanding that operational window. If the car has a high roof and the data suggests it does, the priority is not to change its DNA, but to make it less dependent on surgical execution so that both drivers can exploit it without compromise. The most interesting thing about the first day is that it was not an emotional duel, it was a clash of styles in front of a new machine. Hamilton quickly found symbiosis with the SF26. Leclerc found himself needing to adapt before he could attack. And in modern Formula One, where half a second can define the hierarchy of an entire season, that early difference is not a minor detail. The first day in Bahrain did not decide anything, but it did leave an uncomfortable question floating in Maranello. Are they developing a car that, without looking for it, fits better with the 7-time champion than with his reference driver of recent years? If the first day left a cold data in the telemetry, the second level of reading was much deeper. What does it really mean that Hamilton found half a second in conditions comparable to the SF26? In championship terms, this opens up an interesting scenario. If Ferrari manages to extend the operating window without sacrificing that peak performance that Hamilton has unlocked, they could have an extremely competitive car in varied conditions. But if the car remains sensitive to more aggressive styles, Leclerc will have to reinvent some of his approach to the limit. And here is the real tension of the project. It is not an open internal struggle, but a silent competition to define the evolutionary path of the SF26. Because in Formula One, the driver who best understands the car in its early phase usually influences its development the most. The first day in Bahrain did not crown anyone, but it did establish a very clear technical narrative. The SF26 has enormous potential, but its initial key seems to be in the hands of Hamilton. Because here we no longer talk about telemetry. We talk about direction. We talk about silent hierarchy. We talked about who defines the competitive DNA of SF26. The half second is not simply a performance difference. It is a sign that the car in its current state has a very specific key. And when a team discovers who has that key, they inevitably begin to listen to that voice more in the evolutionary process. Ferrari knows that the SF26 has a high roof. This was demonstrated by the runs in which Hamilton exploited stability in the middle corner and efficiency at the start. But they also know that the car is delicate outside its optimal window. It is a car that does not forgive a sudden transfer, that does not tolerate an excessively pointed front axle without compromising the rear. It is, in essence, a car that rewards progressiveness. Here the strategic dilemma appears. If Ferrari evolves the car to extend that window without altering its DNA, Hamilton will still have that natural advantage that he already showed in Bahrain. If, on the other hand, they try to give it more frontal aggressiveness to adapt it to Leclerc's style, they run the risk of losing that stability that allowed the initial performance to be unlocked. And these types of decisions are not made in public. They are taken in technical meetings, in simulator sessions, in correlation reports. There is another key element: trust. When a driver feels that the car responds exactly to what he expects, he begins to drive with an extra layer of security. And that security allows you to risk more without seeming like you are forcing. In Bahrain, Hamilton did not seem to be at his limit. He seemed to be comfortable on the edge. That psychological difference is gigantic. Leclerc, on the other hand, found himself with a car that did not automatically amplify his instinct. And that generates an adaptation phase. It is not weakness. It's adjustment. But in modern Formula One, where the margins are microscopic, the driver who adapts the quickest to the car's DNA gains ground in technical influence. If the SF26 confirms in the following days that this performance was not circumstantial, the team could tilt the development towards an even more stable concept in medium support and energy management. That would cement Hamilton's natural advantage. But there is also another possibility, that Leclerc finds his own way of reinterpreting the car, that he adjusts his input, that he modifies his braking transition, and that he begins to exploit the same potential from another angle. If that happens, Ferrari would have something extremely dangerous. Two different styles capable of extracting the same maximum performance. And that's where this first day of testing becomes something much bigger than a simple rehearsal. Because if Hamilton has found half a second in the earliest phase of the project, it means that the SF26's hidden margin is real. It means the car has more potential than even Ferrari projected. And that changes the team's objective. It is no longer simply to be competitive, it is to optimize a base that can be champions. The first day in Bahrain gave no points. He did not define a grille. He did not distribute trophies. But it did leave an uncomfortable truth floating around Maranello. The SF26 appears to have found an immediate connection with Hamilton. And when a car and a driver connect from day one, seasons usually change direction. The first day of testing in Bahrain did not leave an official classification. It did not leave noisy headlines or inflammatory statements. But he left something more important, a clear technical signal within Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton was not only half a second faster in comparable runs. He found something. He found a way to keep the SF26 within its optimal window for longer per lap. He found a way to manage weight transfer without breaking the aerodynamic balance. It found energy efficiency without punishing traction. And when a pilot finds that on the first day of a new project, it's no coincidence. The true magnitude of the data is not in the number. It's in the context. Ferrari didn't design the SF26 with one style in mind. But cars, even if they are built in the wind tunnel, end up revealing preferences. And the first indication suggests that this car rewards progressive precision, fine control, patient lap construction. If this pattern is confirmed in the next tests and first races, we could be seeing the beginning of a very different narrative than expected. Not the story of a champion adapting to Ferrari, but the story of a Ferrari that, since its birth, already speaks the language of Hamilton. Are we witnessing the beginning of a new era at Maranello, or just the first chapter of an internal battle that could redefine the balance of the team? Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.